Hello there and welcome to the Business Interview. I'm Markus Karlsson. The days when imminent financial disaster hung over the global economy seem to be gone, but there are still warnings of other lurking risks as we look ahead to the rest of the year. America's foreign policy, China and Iran are among them, according to consultancy firm Eurasia Group. It recently came out with its top 10 risks for 2014. And for more, we can speak to David Gordon. He's head of research at Eurasia Group and one of the authors of that report. Welcome to the program, first of all, and thanks for joining us from Washington, D.C. Now, let's start from the top. You say that there are risks associated to countries like Germany, France, Saudi Arabia and Brazil feeling like second-tier allies to the United States. What do you mean by that?
I think all of America's allies are unhappy right now. I mean, the United States, the paradox is that the United States, the recovery is going better. I think the energy revolution is making the United States in some ways stronger in the world. But 2013, particularly the second half, between the Snowden revelations about cyber spying, the flip-flopping on Syria this summer by President Obama, and then the failure of the United States to conclude the negotiations on this big trade agreement with the Asian countries, the Trans-Pacific partnerships, have led all of America's allies to really wonder what's going on here, what's up with the United States. And of course, for America's key allies, they're not going to turn away from the U.S., but second-tier allies, Brazil, very, very unhappy. Saudi Arabia perceives in the negotiation with Iran really a new agreement, really, a new peace settlement broadly between Iran and the West. I think that's very overstated. So this is going to cause a lot of tensions and allies going their own way. And I think the three really most important are Germany in Europe, where Angela Merkel had really been in some ways extremely close to President Obama, the Saudis in the Middle East, who are supporting extremist groups in Iraq at the same time that the United States and others are supporting the Iraqi government in their efforts to combat a new resurgence of al-Qaeda in Iraq. And then I think in Asia, the Southeast Asian countries, a number of them are really questioning how resilient really is the United States' commitment to Asia that was all of the rage of the talk of the first 2 years of the Obama administration, but doesn't seem to be the focal point anymore.
What could the financial and economic fallout of that be, though? Why should businesses and why should companies care about this potential political risk?
So I think the biggest fallout on this is really on two levels. I think the first is that the Saudis getting more independent of the United States is going to really increase the risk of conflict in the Levant becoming even more problematic. And I think here it's Iraq that's really the focal point. And I think there was a lot of expectation that Iraq over the next few years was going to emerge as a major oil exporting country. I mean, we think that right now exports aren't really at risk immediately, but over the next couple of years, you really may not have the same kind of agreement, stability, in Iraq to enable that to move forward.
So it's on energy markets. It's in energy markets where that risk could sort of make a difference.
Yes, and then with the Germans, I think the real issue is, are we going to be able to negotiate a broad agreement between the U.S. and the EU on trade, given the privacy concerns and the pretty sharp disagreements now between Germany especially and the U.S. On cyber issues and privacy issues that will have to be negotiated out in this trade agreement. Finally, I think in Japan, it's that Japan will be more willing to go its own way in terms of relations with China, which will increase tension between Japan and China, which could have some downward pressure on Asian markets.
Now, this is a time of year when we're getting a lot of predictions, a lot of forecasts ahead of the rest of 2014. How do you measure risk, though? And what are the things that you are looking at when you come out with a thing like your top 10 risks?
Yeah, so part of what we're trying to do is to capture what are things that are changing in the world that may not be fully anticipated yet. So I think really important in that is that in recent years, most of the concern about China has been about China's behavior in the region, with pressures in the South China Sea on China's maritime claims, growing pressures between China and Japan. When we look at China, what we see is a new leadership that has really decided that time is not on their side in terms of redirecting China's economy. But that redirection is going to be very, very hard to do domestically. So our view is that China risk is really shifting to be much more focused on the domestic process of reform and the potential clashes with losers in that reform process. So part of what we're trying to do is to look out there and use our analytic expertise. We have nearly 100 researchers and get ahead of the wave in thinking about what's changing in the world politically and geopolitically and how can that affect markets.
If we look then at the American foreign policy risks, the China risks that you just mentioned, what do you think companies could do? What can businessmen and women do to mitigate these political risks? What do you think they should do with your report?
Yeah, I think that the main impact that our report can have is helping companies engage in strategic planning processes so they're aware of how the world might be changing and they might become more resilient to these risks. So this isn't to say that China is on the verge of collapse, but it is saying that the focus on China as a very stable and rapidly growing place is likely to be much less the case over the next several years. I think similarly, really since 2002, the emerging markets have behaved for businesses and for money managers as an asset class. They've tended to go up or down, but mostly up together. One of the main themes of this report is that the emerging markets are likely to become much more divergent over the next several years, and that there are big elections coming up in 6 of the most important countries in Brazil, Colombia, India, South Africa, and the pathways these countries are going to be more divergent, and that businesses really have to understand that this undifferentiated notion of emerging markets is going to be much less the case in the future.
David, I want to pick you up on that last point there that you made about potentially bruising elections in countries like Brazil, Colombia, India, Indonesia during 2014. Where do you think that risk is the greatest? Where is the risk of political fallout the greatest?
Yeah, I think it's really Turkey, because Turkey is both having an election, but they're also reshaping their institutions. They're creating a stronger presidency, and the elections in Turkey are taking place at a time in which Turkey is really being seriously affected by the unrest in the Middle East, and is also going through a very, very, very dangerous corruption crisis and fight within the ruling AKP party. So I think Turkey is the single country most at risk by this. We're also less optimistic than a lot of people about where the elections in India are going. There's a lot of enthusiasm in the business community about the potential for a BJP government because the BJP has ruled very effectively in Gujarat province. But I think we're still in a situation in India where it's going to be very, very hard to get traction on the reforms needed to continue India's very high growth rate. So we're a little more pessimistic about the prospects of where India is going, even under what will look like a pro-business government led by Narendra Modi.
We don't have a lot of time left, but I wanted to ask you about Europe, because Europe and the Eurozone crisis is not on your top 10 list of risks. It's on your red herrings list, things that that will perhaps take a lot of attention or make a lot of headlines during the year, but won't necessarily matter. Do you think then that the Eurozone debt crisis, is it finally over? Can we say as much now?
I don't think it's completely over, because there's really not a strong growth trajectory in Europe. But I think we can say that given the recovery in Europe, but most importantly, the continued very strong relationship between Angela Merkel and the ECB, and particularly ECB head Mario Draghi, that you aren't going to get any kind of big financial turmoil. Draghi and Merkel are really committed to doing whatever they can to prevent that deterioration. So I don't think we're heading towards another bout of financial stress. But the fact is that the outlook for Europe is still quite weaker than that for North America, for instance. So Europe is really not out of the crisis until they return to growth, and that's not really where they are.
Okay, I suppose we can call it bittersweet news here for us in Europe. Thank you very much, David Gordon from Eurasia Group, for speaking to us. And with that, we're going to wrap up this edition of the Business Interview. Thanks for watching.